There it is. There she goes. No mic. No mic. It's stuck.
Wow, yay, we have a great bunch of people here. I don't see Ed yet.
Nope, don't see him.
Well, but anyway, we do have a quorum. So we have Michael, we have David, we have Jeff, and we have Connor. Okay, so we'll hope we have Ed. But anyway, I sent out. I did not send out minutes. I owe a pile of minutes, but I know that we had a recommendation at a previous meeting that we could review and approve some of these things offline to make the meetings go faster. So anyway, I do owe a bunch of minutes, but I don't have them yet. I will show. So I'll call the meeting to order first off. So we're right on the money here for calling to order. At 6:30, and I will share my screen and hopefully I'm able to do so. Yay! So I'll share, and I do have the agenda up. So, and I was hoping actually to speak with Bill McKenna to get more information on some things, and was not able to do so. So some of these things I'm not going to know. But in any event, we will start by adopting the agenda. And so I'll show the agenda. The minutes, I do plan to send these around and hopefully we'll approve them via email. But anyway, so I'm not going to show them here, but I'll show the agenda. I do want to discuss future meetings in person or Zoom. I was hoping for Ed Sanders because I want to take everybody's opinion into that discussion. For housing, status of the last year's sale, I've got a quick information on that. Status of the building permit moratorium, which I don't really have any update on that. But anyway, the meat of the meeting will be the comp plan 7B and the work that Jeff Collins has been doing. So I'll be turning it over to Jeff when we get there. And then some questions I want to wrap up with of when do we want Woodstock Housing Committee members to join us? And do we want to invite guests from Ulster County ourselves? We talked earlier on about inviting Pat Ryan and March Gallagher. Dennis Doyle, we could invite him, and Evelyn Wright, but of course housing has met with them and different people here have met with them. But anyway, those are other conversations. I do want to say for the two laws we have that are being routed around, we do have a town board meeting tomorrow. I'll be checking with my town board colleagues about where we are about sending them further through the process. I did talk with Steve Romine to let him know that, and I just talked with him today, anyway, to let him know that he would be seeing the telecommunications law before it goes to public hearing, but after some internal folks review it. So in any event, do I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
So moved, sound like Connor, yay. Do I have a second?
Yo.
Yo, sound like David. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Yay,
Aye.
I think I heard enough ayes. Okay, perfect. Okay, that being the case, we've already talked about minutes will be later. I'll ask Ed offline, he's not here, but.
I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ed, thank you. You weren't there at first. And when I shared my screen, then all of a sudden I don't see everybody. I won't share my screen forever, but anyway, wonderful. Thank you, thank you. We have a full house, perfect. So the question that I have about meetings is, as has been known and not a secret, Ashley will be taking a leave for a couple of months. And so Ashley won't be doing Zoom. I've said I would be happy to be the Zoom person for this particular meeting. So there is talk about some other meetings going back in person, and I am liaison to a couple of different groups. And I know some groups are saying, some groups are chomping at the bit to come back in person. And I just want to know what this group wants to do, because I've been very clear that if this group wants Zoom, we're doing Zoom. If this group wants to be in person, we'll do in person. And I'm pushing to actually get the password for Zoom and run Zoom. So I'll do it myself if that's what this group chooses. But I did want to know, do we want to be a Zoom group for the foreseeable future, or do we want to go back in person as soon as we can? What do we want to do about Zoom versus in person?
Zoom is preferable to me, at least for now. I've been trying to sort of keep a lid on all unnecessary spending, and I mean just going out and getting my car back and forth up the mountain does save me a lot of time and gas. I'll say that.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have a vote of Zoom versus in person?
Well, sorry, go ahead, Ed.
I'm for Zoom. I'm really hesitant. I study this Corona thing very carefully, and it's so potentially dangerous, in my opinion, that I'm really hesitant. Miriam and I both have our shots, but we don't go out and, we're living like hermits. This thing is very sneaky, this virus. So I don't think I could come to an open air meeting. I admire all the members of this group, but I don't want to see you in person.
So anyway, and I did, and speaking of seeing people in person, I did see Ed in the grocery store, Ed and his wife in the grocery store a little while back, but we social distance. I didn't run up and give either of them a hug. So yeah, there you go. Does anybody oppose to continuing on Zoom?
I would just like to say that maybe that it seems like when we have some of the larger meetings with the larger groups, it can get it may be helpful to have it in person and with a Zoom link, but if that may or may not occur with us in the future.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll check out. Well, yeah, that's an interesting thought. Could be good. Okay, any other thoughts?
The only question I have is, are we tracking the governor's extension of the open meetings law via Zoom? I don't know what the legal...
It was extended until the 6th of May, I know.
I know it's almost going month by month, so at some point he'll stop extending it, I think, and that's...
Right, but so here's, in talking to Bill McKenna, there's two, in Bill's opinion, there's two parts to that. One part is we all go with the open meetings law, but there are some groups that are more formal than others, because, for example, on this committee, you didn't have to go you didn't have to go to the clerk's office and swear in. Some committees like the planning board, and I probably think the zoning board of appeals, there are some committees where you have to go swear in because it's that level of formality. And this is an offshoot of the comprehensive plan. And so there's less formality to this committee. So even if the governor stops the open meetings law, it's possible that we may be able to be under the radar and do what we want. So that's one way to play it. So, but that's a good question. Open meetings law is a question. But again, we may be able to slide under the radar on that. So David, I hadn't heard from you. Did you want to weigh in, say anything?
No, it's fine. I don't mind the Zoom meetings.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to keep on doing Zoom. Okay, we'll keep on doing Zoom. That's it for that. So what I'll tell you about, okay, so status of the Lasher sale, very quickly. So when we met last time, there was some big discussion about, what's up with Lashers and the moratorium. I don't have news about the moratorium. I know that there's a draft. I was hoping to talk with Bill McKenna to get the absolute latest, but I don't have the absolute latest, but I do know there's a draft moratorium, but I don't believe it's been formalized. Status of the Lasher sale is, as people know, Halliburton and Giuliani pulled back. So they're not part of Lashers, and Lashers did go on the MLS today. I have asked to be able to go look at Lashers just in case there's some possibility that it looks like it could be converted to affordable housing and maybe tie in some group like Repco or who knows. Anyway, so I have been told that I can go take a look at the Lashers site. Again, it would be for the purpose of, is there a way to make affordable housing for the town? Could it be a possibility? But there's a lot of ducks would have to line up. A big deal is the money. So anyway, but that's kind of the news I have in case anybody cares about the last year's sale. It is going on MLS for more money than those two were going to pay for it, and I'm not sure if anybody can swoop in and keep it from being commercial and make it affordable housing, but it is going on the market, so we'll see what the future brings there. Okay, with that, I really wanted to turn it over to Jeff. Jeff sent several documents out. I can either share my screen and show them or not share my screen, and then we can all see each other. But Jeff sent some really good documents out. He had a sustainable community housing zone document that he mailed a couple of weeks ago. He's got a report of the meeting with Dennis Doyle, and thank you very much, because those were excellent meeting notes. So Jeff, thank you for documenting your meeting notes. And then David, I do want to thank you also that HUD, because actually when I read your email about HUD and went to the website, I thought it was of interest because it would be great, getting back to Lashers for a moment. I don't know if there's any way to get grant money, because it talks about grant money. I don't know how you go about getting the grant money, but wouldn't it be great to pick up a property that's in the middle of town that could be affordable housing, because we could get grant money to do it. So in any event, I thought it was very timely. And David, thank you for sending that email about the HUD and the grants. Oh, go ahead.
Well, you need to reach out. It's a federal thing. You have to use Delgado to reach out to the proper people to, like Kevin Cahill got the community center $400,000.
Right.
A public official like Delgado, who's looking to be reelected, could reach out and get a few $1 million to convert the Lasher property into affordable housing. That would be a plum in his hat,
Right.
and a victory for affordable housing.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but I know in his first term, I met with him a number of times. So he actually, I know him. I'm not like a best buddy or anything, but he definitely knows. If I called him up and showed up at his door, he'd recognize me at least. So anyway, that's a really good point. So, okay. All righty. So all that being said, Jeff, I can either share these documents on my screen or I'll unshare and we can see each other. I don't know what will help you the most.
I don't think they need to be shared. I think it's better to just have views of people. It's easier.
Okay. And there we go. We have a Halliburton there. Hello.
Hey, Jesse. So the stuff I want to talk about is the sustainable community housing. Initially, I put out the floating zone document. I'd like to get people to give me thoughts on that. I haven't had any feedback on that yet. But basically, the idea is to be able to the idea behind that floating zone is to be able to overlay existing residential zones within the town to have a vastly increased ability to a vastly increased density, basically, to go from, for example, one house per 5 acres in a 5 acre zoned location to I think up to like 10 or 5 to 10 houses per acre, depending on how we want to do it. The idea being that we cluster houses together, we put a buffer zone around the lots, and we have to make sure, of course, that the housing development has water and sewer. So whether if it's in the hamlet and already has town services, that's great. Most of the open space that we have in town does not have water and sewer. So part of it is that the developer would have to build a community solar or community water and community sewer. The idea is not a new idea. It's been used in a number of towns throughout New York. I have not yet figured out if it actually is used, meaning I know that zone exists. I don't know who's done anything with it or whether it's doable. It's one thing to create a zone, it's another thing to make it actually be something that developers end up using. We had a conversation about that with Dennis Doyle, and his take on it was, that's kind of cool, but there's a difference between a by permit and a by rule kind of a zone. And the idea of having a floating zone, which the developer has to do a permit to get, could be a hindrance to that developer, because you have to go through a process in order to even get to the point that you have the zoning that you need to do the development. And if that is, and using Dennis Doyle's experience, if that is contested, like every development in Woodstock is contested, it could be years and years and years, and developers may never do it. So his suggestion was, look, if you have places in town that you want to have denser developments, just zone them that way. So instead of having a floating zone that can be applied to particular areas, say, look, this area of, say, Xena is an area that we want to do development in. So let's just change the zone to be essentially the supportable community housing zone that allows dense developments with setbacks, assuming that the environment's taken care of, the water's taken care of, and the sewer's taken care of. That was his proposal behind that, and that makes sense to me because it takes one burden away from the developer that wants to build, community housing. The other aspect of what he said around that was, we didn't get to decide where it is in the town we want to have that kind of housing. And we get to zone it that way proactively instead of just hoping someone shows up and builds a development. So I'd like to talk about that idea first and that thought first and see what people think about that.
Well, a question that I have that actually precedes that is, I think that we, and maybe it's us and maybe it's the housing committee as well as us, is like you had said, well, you might go from one house per 5 acres to 5 or 10 homes in those 5 acres, so, or even an acre. And so a question that I have is, I think that we ought to have somehow, is it us, is it the housing committee, somehow we ought to have an idea of how densely populated people do want Woodstock to be, because we're kind of shooting in the dark in a way as far as that goes. So I wish that we had an idea of how densely populated we want Woodstock to be, and then picking where the density is makes sense. But we had the comp plan said Woodstock loves its open spaces, but then Woodstock also wants affordable housing. So I do think we ought to have a plan across Woodstock about where the different things are. And I think, Jeff, one of your documents said that the housing committee was going to give some input on that, which I think would be helpful.
So we're looking at locations where this kind of an idea might happen. What we do know is that Woodstock needs a minimum of 200 more houses. Minimum.
And who knows that, and how do they know
that? That came from Dennis Doyle, and that's that's just based on, I think that's based on affordable housing standards from HUD, I believe. And that's affordable housing. And I don't want to draw a distinction between affordable housing and sustainable housing because they aren't necessarily the same.
Right.
But affordable housing is housing that, like the Upco project, right? Where you have to apply for it, you have to have under a certain amount of income, blah, 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 to go in order to get it. And it's first come, first serve, or lottery system. What I'm looking at, to me, sustainable community housing is housing that is priced at a point that people that make an average salary can afford the mortgage.
Right.
So that price point is around, by my math, which is not at all, final, around 320, 325 per house. So it's not, it's not low income housing. It's not, but it's housing that the average Ulster County income can afford.
Right.
$325,000.
What's that? 325 is my number, and I can work through the numbers with a professional, but that's my take on the numbers.
But what's 325 mean?
225,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, he's saying if somebody with an average salary could afford a $325,000 house. Yeah, an average salary in Ulster County.
Ulster, and I used Ulster County, not Woodstock. I used a broader value than Woodstock. And that's based on the average family income in Ulster County as of 2018, I think it was, is the last number I had. And a 30% of that goes to the mortgage, which is, standard, what housing should be is roughly 30% of income. And that produces, at a mortgage rate of around 2%, around 325,000 that people can afford with an average income. And that's one market level, right? And again, that's not affordable housing. That's community housing. That's sustainable community housing. That's worker housing, whatever term we want to use.
So back to your statement that Dennis Doyle, according to Dennis Doyle, Woodstock needs 200 more houses that are affordable or sustainable. Anyway, the 200. Do we know how many houses Woodstock has?
I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, do
it's
you
around-
have to have houses, or can you have apartments?
When I say houses, I mean housing units. So they could be
Housing
apartments. There could be duplexes, triplexes, housing units is what I'm
Yeah.
referring to. Yeah.
There's about 1,500,
Housing units in Woodstock?
more than that, but yeah, it's under 2,000.
Okay, so between 1,500 and 2,000. So that's like if it's 2,000, that would be like a 10% increase. 200 more would be like a 10% increase.
Yeah. It's a lot.
What's that?
And it's a lot. It's a big increase over what we have.
Well, it's a lot, but it's not like twice as big.
Right.
So a 10%, we might be able to sell a 10% increase. I'd be nervous that we could sell a greater than 10% increase, but I think that we could sell a 10% increase. That's my gut feel.
And I agree. And part of it too is where it is. I think there's areas that are much more flexible for development and much less, will get people less upset. I think anything in the Xena area, people aren't going to be as upset about as if it's in the hamlet. Right?
Well, right.
That's my take.
Right. Because the Xena area, right. I that's my take as well. Although I'd like to see some affordable in the hamlet, because some people that need affordable housing don't have a car. And so
Absolutely.
the hamlet would be handy because they could walk to their food, they could walk to the drugstore, et cetera. So,
Yeah, but in terms of what you guys were talking about before and saying how densely populated do you want, I would imagine places like the hamlet to be, there's a conversation right there in terms of what type of housing can we have in the hamlet that's sustainable. Maybe it's not going to be what we said earlier, 5 units per acre. But when it comes to, you can take it on a more touch and go level. But yeah, when you say Xena, you're talking about the big property out by the Sudbury School, right?
That's exactly what I'm talking about, Connor. The 3 big town properties by the Sudbury School.
And if you did just quickly say, all right, if we assume we went with something like 5-to-1, you're going to need roughly 40 acres to meet that goal if you did it, across 40 acres. So assessing, I feel like maybe is there going to be a subcommittee or a task group to go and evaluate properties? Who is doing that right now?
No one's doing that, and that's a good question. I think, I know that before RUPCO happened, I know that Paul Schultes Jr., who was looking at affordable housing at the time, did come out and assess that town property. And I know his assessment was that it's tough because of the land there. It's very rocky.
Yeah, but I mean, you talk to some people about it though, and they're like, well, you got to bond maybe $1 million to make it buildable in the first place, but it can be done.
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree.
Well, the other thing too, remember, so if we're talking about town property, the town board would have to agree that that's the use of the town property. Well, the other thing is, as Jeff was explaining to me where some of these properties are, one property appears to have road frontage on Xena Road and be right next to the Sudbury School property. The other 2 properties that the town owns appear to be landlocked. So to have a landlocked property be any good, you've got to have somebody has to give you a right of way. So there's a bunch of ifs, ands, and buts here.
What about flooding? Is
Well,
that
that's
property you're talking about, is it in the floodplain?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, there's no. There are some wet areas there. I know that land really well, of course, because I walk it a lot. There's some wet areas that we would preserve the wet areas. But mostly it's up high enough. It's not in the floodplain. It's not flooding at all. But yeah, that's not a concern at all in that area.
So we'd have to figure. I think that we'd have to figure out is if like somebody just said, have a subgroup to assess the town property. We'd have to understand, if we go with affordable housing in a town property, and there's 2 ways to go about this. One is if you want it on a town property and then the town has some involvement, is their only involvement to reach out to a REPCO or some other housing group and just say, hey, you can use this for housing. We own the property as a town. You can use it for housing. Come on in, whatever housing group would do it. The other thing is, my thought for this housing was it may be scattered across other properties in the town of Woodstock, not necessarily town of Woodstock owned properties. So, I mean, whatever zone we have, I'm assuming would be, so I like Jeff's idea of a sustainable housing zone. And I did see somewhere that Jeff talked to Kirk Ritchie, and that he had agreed that their housing committee could be looking to see where they thought the sustainable housing ought to go. And then we could zone accordingly with the zoning law. So, but then of course that leaves it to whoever the property owner is to say, hey, I'm going to add another building onto my property, and it's going to be affordable housing, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think just saying, hey, what's the town going to do? And can we pop all these buildings on a town property? Maybe the town will go for it. Maybe the town won't go for it, but we ought to be having a way that other properties can be used for it, not just town property, for sure.
I agree. And I think that if we like the idea of either a floating zone, or I like the idea of both, actually, a floating zone, which can be applied after the fact, if someone goes through the process, and an actual zone. I think we need to just go through the details of what that zone is and how that zone is described at some point in time. There's
right.
What I wrote is a very rough draft based on the Ellington, Connecticut one. Made some changes. I dropped the lot size significantly. It's just totally stuff thrown out that I don't have, that we need to get feedback on. In answer to Jesse's question, a floating zone is a zone that's applied to an existing zone. So what happens is someone says they want to develop this particular lot, but they need this sustainable floating zone to be able to do that. So they put together a preliminary plan that goes to the planning board. The planning board approves the preliminary plan. Then it goes to the town board, and the town board actually changes the zone to be that zoning type for that particular development.
Yeah. So if I can add to that, so like right now we have some zones in Woodstock that are R5. You have to have 5 acres. You can't subdivide below 5 acres, and some are like an R3. Can't subdivide below 3 acres. Some are an R8. So those are some examples. But you have this floating zone that if your R5, for example, property met the criteria of the floating zone, then even though your property is in an R5 zone, your particular property might be given a different, the floating zone, if it applies to you, you wouldn't have to follow the R5 rules because the floating zone would float to where you are if you meet the criteria of the floating zone. So we got all these zones that have different rules, but the floating zone allows you to do different things with some properties in that zone. If you meet the criteria of a floating zone, you might be allowed to do other things like subdividing below 5 acres. If you meet certain criteria, maybe you'd be allowed to, because the floating zone would say, okay, now we'll float over to where you are, and you can apply the floating zone criteria rather than the criteria that you're already part of.
And the difficulty with the floating zone criteria, and this is what Dennis Toy was saying, was you need to get a combination of planning board approval and town board approval to make that happen. Whereas if you just already zoned it that way beforehand, you don't have to get those approved. It's already approved for that particular zoning type. That's and
I'm reading Jesse's next question. It would depend on the criteria. So that's, if you're going to have a floating zone, you have to write up the criteria. We're just getting going on this, so I don't know what the criteria would be. So I don't know if it would be affordable housing only. Probably not, but maybe. We didn't write it up.
And again, I'm looking more at the the 325 level housing, not the below market housing, the way below market housing. We could apply for that too, but that it's a combination of factors we need to do here. And then one of the criteria can be some percentage must be affordable, some percentage must be, some percentage can be market price, and some percentage can be community housing. So we can also do it that way, where there's different percentages to come into it too.
Yeah, and I saw Ed shaking his head.
Hmm?
Were you shaking your head or not? Not at.
Oh, I was listening. It's just that I've had somewhat of an experience in this town of trying to build affordable housing. And I had a project with Les Walker a few years ago, and the community, if you try to build 200 houses of the $325,000 range in Woodstock, any place, you're going to have incredible. The thing that happened with Lasher is nothing like what would do with if someone tried to build 200 houses. I think we should challenge Mr. Doyle's calculation that 200 houses are needed, but I think the answer might be to follow. You know, the housing committee has done a lot of great work in the past, and their proposals sent to us in June of 2020 call for an independent community housing trust, which would create, you know, rental and for purchase homes for middle class to low income, you know, a local housing trust. So I think that the town, if it has all this land out in Xena, I think it does, it should keep ownership of this and turn it over to an entity to build, Rupco or some other thing, to build houses on it and rental houses, and keep ownership and turn it over to a trust fund. Otherwise, you need to, you know, I'm all for this, but I think you need to gain the trust of Woodstockers. And one way might be for the town to keep ownership of all this land out in Xena. And however hard, you know, people came to Woodstock to farm because all the farms in Vermont were burned out. You know, it was terrible land, but land is land. They could have farms in Woodstock, which was very difficult. So we could build houses in difficult land in Xena, I'm sure. But yeah. I think we need really to get a new paradigm, really, for, you know, if we try to build $325,000 houses out in wherever, out in Wittenberg or out in Lake Hill or somewhere, you know.
But somebody's getting, yeah, somebody will have a fit. But I think I would agree to the idea of 200 more housing units, if some of them could be apartments. So if we said, well, we want 200 more housing units, then maybe we would say, you know, how many of them are going to be the $325,000 homes? How many will be apartments? Because I think it's possible that there are vacant buildings in Woodstock that could be converted to apartments and affordable housing. But it's a matter of, you know, are there abandoned houses? Are there, yeah, we just have to look at it. And when I think of the Lasher property, and, you know, of course it takes money to do things, and the big question is who's got the money. But it may be that some of those buildings, maybe the existing buildings, maybe could be cut into, you know, multiple residences inside that were affordable. I don't know. But then you have to have somebody that had the money to buy the property and to have the money to upgrade it to cut it into buildings. And apparently my understanding, oh, by the way, is that even though, like you might have read that Seaman Wilsey has bought Lashers, my understanding is they bought the Lashers business, but it doesn't give them any right to do any funerals on the Lasher property. Right. So apparently Seaman Wilsey did buy the Lasher's business, but that has no bearing on the property for sale.
I want to kind of change this question a little bit now because we talked a little about the zoning of sustainable community housing. I think that something that we can do faster than that is the ADUs.
Oh, the ADUs, that's right, yes.
And I think we attached dwelling units. I think we can do that much faster because I think if we made those available in all zoning areas, that would be a huge increase in the ability to build those ADUs.
Yeah, and the ADU, and that was in part of what Jeff sent too, and he sent two things, right? So the idea of an ADU would be that you know, additional dwelling unit that somebody could take an existing property and that we could change the zoning code to allow them to add a dwelling unit to their property. We might have criteria there too about, Can they
Right.
add just one? Can they add more than one? But the idea of the ADU is you're adding additional attached dwelling units so that somebody could turn their property into housing for more than one family, so to speak. And
That's specifically literally attached to the
No.
primary dwelling,
I don't think it's attached.
Well,
as
the
in
A-
attached to the parcel, so you could build what I'll call a remote building on a different part of your property that you could then put up as affordable housing. And we're going to facilitate that by changing the density requirement.
Yeah, I think the idea is to be able to add one additional dwelling unit per property, whether it's attached or unattached, depending on exactly the property layout. Like my particular house, it would make sense if I want to do this to convert my basement into a living unit, right? Because it has a separate entrance. Some other people that have more land could do an additional small house on that land. But the idea of being able to do it anywhere would, I think, vastly increase the possibility for housing. And as I think Jesse said, or someone said, it'll also clean up some existing out of requirement places too.
Well, so just to be clear though, so the ADU, and this is from your email, Jeff, about your report of the meeting with Dennis Doyle, where you list the A as standing for attached, and we think of it as attached to the property. That makes more sense than having to be attached to the current building. But the A does stand for attached, not additional, correct? I got that from your.
I may have misquoted that. It may be additional, not attached. I may have that wrong.
Okay, additional or attached. Okay, versus attached. Okay. But in any event, right. So we could change the law there. And it's interesting because then what Jeff went on to say was, do we want to change the zoning code to require an ADU, additional housing unit on dwelling unit in all new housing construction? And I'll tell you, as a town board member, I couldn't vote for that. So I think allowing
that was not my idea. That wasn't brought up, and I'm just mentioning it.
It was your notes from the meeting, right? It was your notes from the meeting. I'm just saying, boy, right. I would avoid that one. But the first one to say allowing it is something that, considering that. And again, we want to pick what zones would we want to allow, but allowing additional dwelling units might make a lot of sense. But we have to decide where. And again, this is where I really would love to see what the housing committee tells us, or what we think ourselves. Somebody, either we or they, ought to be developing a vision of where this extra building goes. Because I agree with what I think Jeff said before. If it goes in Xena, people probably aren't going to get too upset. If it goes in a field in Xena that people aren't like embracing all the time. So yeah, we ought to have an idea of where these extra housing, we ought to have an idea of how much. 20 housing units is probably not 200 more housing units. If it's including apartments as well as homes, is probably not bad. It's about 10% more, but we ought to have a vision of where it's going to go. And if we can do things out of existing, like the zombie houses that have been abandoned, and maybe we can do something with zombie houses. Maybe we can get with Ellen in the building department and find out more about where those are.
As far as
zombie houses?
It's a house that people have abandoned, but nobody's done any with them. It's a vacant home.
Can you give me an example of one of them in the town of Woodstock that hasn't been developed into a STR?
Well, there's a good question. That would be a question for Ellen. I know.
Yeah, I do believe there are some, Michael. I don't know where they are, but I do believe there are some.
So I will ask Ellen if she can list out the zombie houses.
There
As
can't.
far as where ADUs would go, sorry.
Well,
As far as where ADUs would go, I think any zone, as long as it meets requirements, setback requirements, et cetera. This was basically the intention of what we were saying. If you have the property and you can satisfy the setbacks, then you're okay.
Setbacks, but in terms of setting it apart from an already existing home, I'm just wondering if you're in an R3, an R8, up in here on Need Mountain Road, there are a few properties that were grandfathered in at smaller, sizes. I'm wondering, do you think then there will be density reductions for allowed for this thing, or is this going to be sort of the ADU going to be something that's more targeted to people who have open land, as opposed to opening an avenue for people with smaller amounts of land to put tighter lodgings on?
I think the idea, Connor, is it kind of breaks apart the density. It kind of doubles the density in some sense. So, you know, I'm in an R, I don't know what I meant in Xena here. What's Xena? R1, 1.5? Where we live. Yeah, I mean, if this were the case, you know, and I could build an attached, like convert my basement into an apartment, that's doubling the density, right? If someone has 5 acres and they want to build, and again, there'd be requirement, or there'd be size restrictions on the ADU. It couldn't be as big as the main house, right? You couldn't build a mansion as an ADU. It would have to be a smaller house. And we have to look at the size requirements for that. If you did that on a 5 acre, 8 acre, you're still doubling the size of that as far as numbers of people in that, number of units in that. So I think that's the idea, is you can almost conceptually double the available spots without changing any other zoning law.
Yeah.
Well, at least
I
in
think
your case, without changing the footprint much, because
Well-
that's what I'm wondering about, more people who change the footprint, but, you know,
Right.
talk about it.
Well,
But what-
changing the footprint would have requirements on the size of the new footprint. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jeff, I think you're in an R3 maybe. How many acres does your house have?
Less than 1.
Are you for sure?
R3 and R5. Xena is not R, it's probably R3 or R5. But what Jeff is proposing can be handled partly by changing 260-60. This is in 260, that's the accessory apartments within a detached structure on a house, and also accessory apartments within a single family dwelling. All you have to do is change the language in that section 260-60 of the zoning law and allow the construction of an attached house or living unit. You know, they got the issue of ownership though. You know, will you be able to sell this additional residence on a property?
Right, that's the question I would have. Can you subdivide?
No.
Can you, once you, so you're saying this ADU is not, it does not give you permission to subdivide the property and sell it off. The ADU means you're living forever with an additional dwelling unit.
Yeah, and you can rent it, and we'd also probably want to put a restriction on long-term rental only for these units.
Absolutely.
Well,
Right.
so you could add that language to the accessory apartment and add language accessory house in a
Right.
detached structure on a property that exists. And, you know, you have to allow for sewage and water and all that, but that's a way around and making more simple what Jeff is proposing about and then you add language for any new structure. You know, I would disagree a little bit with Laura. I think on new housing constructed, that there could be a law in the zoning law forcing an additional middle income or lower income house to be built and float it and see if it works. I mean, this is a serious time. I'm saying this because I'm flabbergasted that my neighbor, who has a Bearsville level house, is renting out her house for $5,000 a month for a year. And so how can anybody who makes $20 an hour working for the town of Woodstock afford to pay? You'd have to make $150,000 a year to afford $5,000 a month. If you have to pay 30% of your salary on, anyway.
Yeah.
But I think Jeff's idea has great merit. We just have to adjust the accessory language in 260-66 of the zoning law and
Is it 260-66 or 260-60?
60.
60. Okay. Well, I just have to say that as a town board member, again, if we had a law that said if you buy land and you're going to build a house, you have to build an accessory structure that you rent out to force new landowners who are going to build a new house, force them to be a landlord, I would vote no. I'm just being honest. I would vote no. But in any event, I think allowing it is a perfect idea. Mandating it, because again, now you're forcing a landowner who wants to build a private house to have strangers living on their property. I've been a landlord, and I would never force anybody to do that. I had a good experience as a landlord. However, not every tenant was a good experience. I can tell you that. So I would never force that on anybody.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about it, positive or negative, but when that was brought up, Dennis Doyle said, if someone doesn't want to do it, just to have them pay a fee in lieu of it, and put that money into an affordable housing trust.
You're not convincing me to vote yes.
I'm not trying to.
I'm only one vote of a 5-member board, but I'm telling you, my vote would be not only no, but hell no.
I think just allowing it is a major step in the right direction.
Allowing it is a wonderful step. Yeah. Allowing it's a wonderful step. Now I'm watching my clock. We like to keep these meetings to an hour. Now, a couple of things. I know that Jeff, and thank you very much for Jeff for the work that you've done so far, because Jeff had put together, what we discussed last time was that Jeff would put together an additional version of the Sustainable Community Housing Zone. I have my, what is the letter, but I got it printed off here. And the plan was that different board members, that this would build into a document. He would start with it, and even put in his cover email, here are some other steps that need to happen to have this build. So we talked about having a document that, and this was the floating zone, but I know he's rearranged it to call it the Sustainable Community Housing Zone, which could have a floating component and could have a not floating component. But in any event, so the direction we agreed on last time was Jeff agreed to be the initial drafter of this, send it around, have people give an input, and this document would grow until it grows enough to cover what it needs to cover, and then it becomes a sample law that then we send around to the town board and through the process. So I know Jeff sent a copy around. Are you still waiting for feedback, Jeff? Did you get any feedback? And what is the next step?
Some feedback. I think I almost wonder if we want to do a side direction, because I think Ed is correct. I think if we look at the ADU, I think we can take the existing zoning code and make changes fairly quickly that we can agree to. Maybe get that going a lot faster than, because the thing with the Sustainable Community Housing Zone is that defining the criteria that makes that fits, that defines that can be tough. And I think that will take community input to get buy-in on those requirements.
Oh, sure.
Well, I think of additional things, like what about having a floating housing zone that includes just a single house or a single property, and then have the right to break that house up into small units like Les Walker's tiny houses or a bunch of apartments, divide an existing house, create an affordable housing zone that includes a 1-acre plot somewhere with a house on it. And then divide that house up into 4 units, 5 units, 3 units, 6 units, let that happen. And I think neighbors would be more amenable to having something like that in their neighborhood than a bunch of, large scale or larger houses, built, people. I just know I've been here 44 years in Woodstock, and I know what the townspeople, what they think about multiple unit subdivisions, and it, when they tried to build a Sheraton resort and where the post office is in 1984, it brought out the whole town. So,
yeah. I don't mean to laugh, but apparently there are 1,500 signatures on the Lasher Field saying keep it a field. 15, I've heard 1,500 petition signatures. So speaking of bringing the whole town out, there you go.
Yeah, so we have to we're walking on.
It happens every time.
Well, Dave and I and we all agreed that we need to do something about housing for regular working people and regular salaries in Woodstock. It's like we have to be very careful and precise and non-threatening with what we do. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm reading Jesse's comments over the side. And I know, Jesse, you're going to keep it a field. I don't know if I should say anything or not say anything, but I thought, Jesse, just for the record, what the heck? I mean, I thought you guys were listening to the people, and you guys changed your plan based on what you heard. And people are digging their heels in, and, it's on the open market now. And, the people may well have been better off with your plan than whoever buys it, because we don't know yet who's going to buy it and what they're going to do. And I did think you did a really good job listening to the people, but then the people in Woodstock have a way of speaking, and it is what it is. But anyway.
Okay, so moving forward, Ed, do you want to take a shot at looking at the 260-60 and changing the?
Yeah, I'll do a draft and send.
Okay, that'd be great.
I'll make a copy of the actual law and then put strikeout marks between stuff that's altered and underline what would be new, or put in bold what's new. And that'll be pretty easy to do. I'll do that by the next meeting for sure.
Great.
Okay. And so we'll meet in 2 weeks. So Jeff, do you have ideas? Because I would love to see this sustainable community housing zone. I'd love to see this work continue. So are you able to continue developing that? Or you kind of, okay, I didn't know if you're kind of stuck till you get more input, or whether.
I think part of what the next step is identifying locations where it might apply. Mm-hmm. And, in addition to possibly Xena, maybe other parts of town too, I have to talk with the housing. I'm not as familiar with Bearsville or those other areas as I am with Xena. So I think that might be one way to look at it too, is if it can apply here, how would it apply? And then, as Ed has said, can we apply it to small lots also instead of just large lots? And how do we make that work out? So thinking about those two things might be the next step too.
I'm sorry. So ID locations where it might apply, and I heard you say about small lots.
Yeah, instead of looking at large, like 30-acre lots plus, look at what Ed's suggestion was. Can we do something in a 1-acre lot to make it multiple housing, multiple affordable housing?
Yeah. And you know where to find the zoning map, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, right. So I won't bore you by telling you. So. Nope,
I got that, and I got the Ulster County parcel
viewer,
which is great.
Okay.
Woodstock is a good idea too.
Wait, what's that?
Just to put in West Saugerties Road is a possibility too. There's a lot of land out there too.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Laura, can I just ask, I can appreciate the long-term planning and horizon that we're looking at from a committee here. In considering any of the things that we've discussed, I don't see a building occurring before 2030 when you take a look at finding the land, developing the land, and getting it there. And it appeared to me that there was a bit more of an acute situation at our last meeting. I mean, we are talking about very long-term horizons here, which I think we need to talk about. Mm-hmm. But we don't know that we'll have a housing problem in 8-10 years. We're assuming we will.
Mm-hmm. Well, so, I mean, what I'm hoping we're on the lookout for, and this is part of what, I know I made a note earlier that I would talk to Ellen in the building department about what they call the zombie houses. But the idea, so one thought is, are there houses that are totally being unused, and is there a way to convert them into affordable housing, or even divide into, take a house and cut it into like a 2 dwelling units or whatever. So I mean,
I think here's really kind of the nutshell of what I'm thinking here to myself is, what effect has the STR law had on housing in Woodstock?
Well, the STR law has definitely halted some STRs.
What,
Because
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. How did it? What
so the
effect did it have?
what if, well, I guess, well, I'll tell you what I know has happened. What's the long-term effect? I guess we'll have to see, or what's the overall effect. But I can tell you that because we set a cap for non-owner occupied, we have reached the cap and we have turned people away. There are people, in fact, I just had a visit with somebody in Woodstock today who asked me to come help them because their next door neighbor wanted to be an STR, and they did receive a cease and desist, and now that neighbor wants to convert to a regular bed and breakfast. So I can tell you the fact that we have the cap on the non-owner occupied, we also have a cap on owner occupied, but that's kind of a higher cap, and I don't know if we've reached that. We've definitely reached the cap of the non-owner occupied, and I do know at least one person's gotten a cease and desist because I was at the neighbor's house who was complaining. Now they got the cease and desist on non-owner occupied. They want to go be a bed and breakfast. So I can tell you it's causing a bit of a shakeup because we've reached the cap and we're not allowing more, and it is causing people to be changing their behavior.
But at the
So-
same time, I want to say, at the same time, since the time the STR law was put in effect, housing rentals have gone up significantly.
Which is
It
good, right?
hasn't slowed down.
Are they changing to
in-
good behavior?
you mean
or bad
housing- you mean-
behavior?
You mean short-term housing, or you mean long-term housing rentals is going up,
Both.
Jeff?
Both. It hasn't stopped. I mean, it hasn't slowed down. The long-term, I used to be a long-term rental. I know what I was renting my house out, which is so low, it was half the price what I could have rented it out. And that's,
Yeah,
if I had that house now, I could rent for $3,000 a month. A tiny little house in Zeno.
right. So rents are getting way beyond what a regular worker at housed or
Mhm.
at the town offices, or I don't know what Ashley makes, but it's I told you, my neighbor's just rented out her house for $5,000 a month, and it's a dinky little house. It has a swimming pool. I don't know if the pool works, but she's got somebody paying $5K a month for it for a year. I mean, that's unbelievable, But so we may be, that's why I think we should start studying land trusts and way of setting housing aside, so that when somebody tries to sell their house, they can't make a bundle and flip it, but that it remains in a housing stock of affordability. And I think the
Right.
Housing Committee has come up with some good ideas in their submissions to us.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. Well, Jesse, you've been very silent, except you've been putting a lot of stuff in the chat. Is there anything that you wanted to add to the conversation here?
I didn't know I could chat. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Oh,
I can hear
okay,
you.
great. Oh, I thought this was a committee. I didn't realize I could speak on this. Yeah, so listen, I'm hearing everything that you guys are saying, and yeah, I mean, just for the record, we asked for more time because of this potential building moratorium that everybody was signing up for.
Right.
The reality is, you're right. We were planning to work with the community. In fact, one of the things we planned to do after speaking to everybody that Friday afternoon was, instead of taking down the funeral home, we were going to keep it and turn it into an artist residence community. And give it new life, and make the viewing rooms,
Right.
many of you, I'm sure, have used to see. We're going to be gallery areas, and we were going to make the preparation room turn that into a studio for the artists, and create two potential units upstairs for artists to come and stay and show their work. And whatever net proceeds we were going, this was all planned out, but whatever net proceeds we had planned to you know, donate to the community across the board, whether,
Mhm.
you know, there's any number of causes I get notices for on the regular asking for donation, which we make a lot of donations already, but this was going to give us that opportunity to actually
Right.
make even a bigger impact. And,
Mhm.
you know, that was us listening to the community. The reason for us asking for more time is because we've been told that, you know, everybody was going to vote for this moratorium. Now, I understand, you know, the reasons why, you know, you're doing what you're doing, and I appreciate your time and everybody's effort in these calls. We weren't looking to overdevelop the land. We were looking to work with the community. And as much as, you know, and the reality is, I just think that when a developer is going to say they're going to work with the community and actually reach out to the community personally,
Mhm.
why is it that we just can't come to some kind of middle ground together?
Well, because this is Woodstock.
No, I'm aware of that. I'm a resident. I'm a resident in Woodstock. Okay, whether
Yeah.
I vote here or not, Laura, I am a
Yeah.
resident. I pay taxes. I've paid taxes since 2005. I've done a lot for the community and will continue to do a lot for
Right.
the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just, you know, why fight? It's just, it doesn't make any sense to me. If somebody's willing to work and reach across the table and try to come to some kind of middle ground, I mean, that goes, I mean, in my book, that goes a long way. And that's what we were trying to accomplish.
And I get it. And that's why I made my statement earlier. I get it. And you did reach out, and, you know, people are people. I've lived in Woodstock for 40 years, and people, you know, there's hot buttons, you know, back in the day, if you said traffic light, if there was a candidate and somebody accused that candidate of wanting a traffic light, whether or not that candidate ever said they wanted a traffic light, if the Woodstockers believed a candidate wanted a traffic light, regardless of what they said or didn't say, that candidate was done. Yeah, I mean, I've just been in this town for a long time, and I certainly understand. Ed understands how the people think. I have my own opinion of how the people think, and sometimes they just get on a hot button. And so it is what
Great
it
if we
is.
could evolve.
I saw you trying to work with the community. I saw it, and I can't change. You know, I'm only one person. I can't change how it all came down, and it came down the way it did. And this committee can't change how your situation came down. It is what it is. So
I understand that, but the last thing I'll mention is that I'm all for workforce housing, and I'm going to continue to, you know, plan and potentially develop small workforce housing. I have 2 properties that I'm thinking about that we could do a workforce house on. We already, you know, the hotel already rents one for one of our employees. So we're going to continue to do that.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. So, okay. So is there anything else? We kind of have next steps. Ed says he's going to do a draft of the 260-60 for the ADU, the additional dwelling unit. We think the A might stand for additional. Jeff is going to continue working on the sustainable community housing zone. I'll continue working that a bit. So those are our next steps. We're meeting in 2 weeks. Is there anything else that people wanted to cover in this call?
I really don't want this to be a big discussion topic tonight. But I'm sure everyone reads the news. Recreational adult use marijuana passed in New York State.
I didn't know that, Connor.
Yeah, sorry to break it to you.
Wow.
But
I've only been working on it for 3 years myself.
I've been having some conversations about that, and one of them was with Bill, who does agree that it's under our jurisdiction, as it would be, to bring that up for discussion and consideration when it comes to zoning consideration. So I just want to put it out there that at some point, not until well after we've tabled housing and some other things,
Right.
I'd like to facilitate and start a discussion around that. And what it is we want to see and how we plan to facilitate this new
So are you
revolution.
thinking in terms of sales or in terms of people growing it in their field?
Both.
Well, yeah, both. I mean, I think, there's a lot to consider there. But when I look at other places in, say, California, and I mean, granted, I'm looking at places that are bigger than our little town. And again, I don't want to get too into the weeds. We can all go home and enjoy
Literally.
ourselves. But I can't believe I just did that, and I didn't even realize. But just to say that there are considerations, for example, of how close you may want, for example, dispensaries to be to each other, to schools, all kinds of things like that.
Ah,
There's actually, just so you know, kind of, there's a law about schools, and it's 500 feet from a school, 200 feet from a church. The towns
Yeah.
can opt in or opt out. So there's a lot of already stuff that we need to work on, but yeah.
so that's
Yeah,
already in the law.
It's already in the law specifies 500 feet from a school, 200 feet from a church.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I've seen it be 800 from a school and 500 from a church. I didn't know if the church thing was really something. I didn't know how prevalent that was, but schools, I definitely
Well, it's in the
felt.
law. Yeah, it's in the law already. So that's something we
So
can
maybe
change if we wanted to.
I'll give you a call at some point, Jeff, because I'm trying to do some fact finding on this too. And by the time, I think a lot, in the coming year, a lot of these questions are going to get ironed out on the state level. But just wanted to bring up that I'm sure there are considerations we'll want to take, and as this board. So yeah.
Yeah, so very, very, very interesting. Well, it's kind of funny because as I mentioned, I was at somebody's house today talking about their neighbor, and as I was leaving, they had some plants in a window. I said, "Oh, what's that?" There are about 8 plants, and just about a couple inches tall, out of 8 little peat pots. And oh, that's marijuana. Oh, okay. I guess we're jumping right in there with a new law. So hey,
Feet first.
what's that?
I said feet first.
Be
Yeah.
first.
Feet first. Yep.
Yeah.
Jumping in. Jumping in
there you
feet
go.
first.
Or already starting her stash. So anyway, all righty. Well, that's a good. So we'll add that to the list. But that's a really good point, and we might as well be first too in terms of jumping right out there. Anything else you want to talk about on this call? Okay, thank you. Thanks everybody. Thanks Jesse for joining us. You're welcome to join. Oh, and as far as protocol, by the way, Jesse. So we do. The board members always get to speak, and guests, if they're called upon, can always speak. But it was appropriate to put things in the chat. But I wanted to make sure, since you were very active in the chat, I do want to make sure you had a chance to speak, and I appreciate you joining us as well.
Thank you, and I'd like to be a part of whatever I can do to help.
Oh, great, fabulous, fabulous, and thank you, committee, and we'll talk in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Motion
talk
to
in 2 weeks.
adjourn.
Oh, there you go. We need a motion to adjourn. Who made the motion to adjourn?
Connor
Jeff,
did.
what's that? Connor, a motion to adjourn. Second.
I'll second it.
Second.
Jeff, all in favor?
Yay.
Aye.
Yay. Great meeting. Thank you all very much. And we'll talk in 2 weeks. And
See you
thanks,
later.
Ashley. Thanks,
Thank you,
Ashley.
Ashley.